Son Éminence, Son Excellence, chers frères et chers sœurs. It's such a privilege for us to be here, and sorry for the technical difficulties before we started. We want to talk about the task given to us to reflect on the synthesis report and to make some proposals to our African delegates and bishops for a successful participation at the second session of the Synod. And we make these proposals deeply sensitive of our vocation to think along with the Church, sentire cum ecclesia, and will carry in our hearts the joys and sorrows of our people. And I borrowed this title after my conversation with Archbishop Fuanya. So, is Africa ready to lead the Church? Are our African delegates ready to lead the Church in Rome come this fall? So the first point is that we need to listen to the voices from the past and the present. We have heard these words before, some observations that we have made from the seminar, and then the very interesting discovery that we made as we studied the synthesis report and the Kampala document. We see that most of the things you find in the synthesis report, African bishops have said, and even said more clearly and more profoundly. Then we point at some of the themes, and then we leave you with some proposal we make in humility to you to consider as we walk in faith, hope, and love, but with deep sense of humility and deep sense of our vocation as African bishops, African delegates, to lead the Church at this very important time. Father Edward already said, Father Ade already said that, quoted, the one you see on that statue, I mean, those who knew Cardinal Zungrana, I hope the statue looks like him. Because sometimes they make a statue and so I never met Cardinal Zungrana, so I hope I have not distorted anything. But I think he looks very holy and very composed there. So that was at the ceremony in 2021 organized to honor him through a congress that was organized in Ouagadougou. Now, I wanted to start my presentation by posing a small aporia, but that would be very daring of me to ask cardinals and archbishops and bishops to answer a question. But I want to start with the speech given by Cardinal Zungrana on July 30th, 1969. The main theme of his speech was, what are the main problems that face the Church in Africa in our times? First, he spoke of the external imposition of pastoral plans and schemes from outside Africa as one of the problems that having a Pan-African Episcopal body should confront. Second, he spoke of the growing number of Christian population in Africa and the need to form priests, religious, and the laity of Africa to take up the task of deepening the faith of Africa and creating strong ecclesial communities in the continent. Then he bemoaned the slow pace of economic development, the challenging social conditions facing Africa, and that Africa is caught between many world forces that either forget Africa exploit Africa or is minimally even concerned about what goes on in Africa. Then he bemoaned the fact that many African bishops, priests, and pastoral agents feel isolated from one another, and that there seems to be no common front for the continent at local, regional, or continental levels. Then he suggested that there are two main functions SECAM should carry out. First, improving information and exchange of ideas and communication in the whole continent. Secondly, that theological and pastoral education should be deepened in Africa between bishops and theologians. And then he pointed out that SECAM exists to place African church in the world church, to promote African interest and reduce the isolation and alienation that our bishops and priests feel, especially those who are in remote parishes and in remote dioceses. One of the quotes I took is where he said, we need to look for formation that is better suited to today's Africa. Now, if I removed the name of Cardinal Zungrana and talked about all these things, you would think that it is Cardinal Fridolin that is speaking today. Because it seems that some of the challenges that Cardinal Zungrana pointed out are still here with us. In an interview which he gave to La Croix last year, Cardinal Fridolin said, Africa is the future of the church. That is obvious. I don't want to go through all the quotes, but that the first priority for his leadership is to finalize successfully this synodal process. Then for the rest, it is all the work of in-depth pastoral evangelization in Africa, as well as working on all the problems related to poverty, injustice, the emigration of our young people who abandon the continent to seek what they believe to be paradise, which very often ends in tragedy. All this, Cardinal Fridolin says, brings us back to our responsibility as the Church of Africa. During this seminar, I don't know how we responded to these concerns of the Cardinal. Archbishop Andrew Nkeafuanya reminded me last night that all three popes have spoken about Africa as the future of the church. And I'd like to make reference to some important points here. Flying back from Rome after his 5 days pilgrimage of peace as an apostle of hope to Africa in 2015, Pope Francis said in answer to a question, what was the most memorable part of your trip to Africa? Pope Francis says, for me, Africa was a surprise. God always surprises us, but Africa surprises us the most. I remember so many moments, but above all, I remember the crowds. They felt visited. Pope Francis said that Africa is a continent of hope. And Africa always surprises visitors to Africa because they come to this land with a lot of negativities about Africa, only to see that God has made a home in this land. In the 19th century, the Scottish missionary of Africa, David Livingstone, said, and I quote, already Africa is God's own. Maybe we might now begin to believe that because he's a white man. Already Africa is God's own. God did not wait for me to bring him here. I found God in every African village. Now we know the words of Pope Benedict. A precious treasure is to be found in the soul of Africa. where I perceive a spiritual long for a humanity that appears to be in a crisis of faith and hope. Pope John Paul II uses the expressions, you find that in Ecclesia in Africa, number 6, and in many of his writings. I just took some of these expressions. He says, we are now in the hour of Africa. This is a favorable time for Africa. Africa is witnessing a historical moment of grace. Africa is the new center of gravity of Christianity. Africa is witnessing a sign of the times. This indeed is rich Africa and creative Africa. Now, the question that Archbishop Andrew reminded me of and that I also pose, are we ready to lead the church? That, I think, is a fundamental question that we propose to you to be before you as you prepare spiritually and through other means to go to the Synod. Are you, our dear delegates, ready to lead the Church of God in Rome at the second session of the Synod? Our proposal then that we make subsequently is made so that you, our delegates and our bishops, can lead the church, the world church, the church in Africa. But that must begin with answering a fundamental question at the end of the Second Vatican Council, where there was all this battle for which is the correct interpretation of the Council's documents. Pope Paul VI issued an encyclical Ecclesiam Suam, where he asked the question, who do you say you are? Church, who do you say you are? And who do you wish to be as a church? In my thinking, the answers to these questions can be found if we look into our history as a church in Africa that goes back to the very heart of the Trinity and the earliest arrival of the faith here in these holy lands. And also that most of the formative conversations that took place in the early church were done in this continent. No wonder Pope Benedict in Afriche Munus challenged African theologians that time has come for Africa to take the lead again, just like the Church of Alexandria and the Church of Carthage. It's not just a leadership in number, but also a leadership in theological education, in deepening our understanding of the mysteries, and then in helping to make intelligible what we believe, what we confess, what we profess, and what we live. So, it is not a church that we want. And this is very important, because in a lot of conversations that I have been involved in, especially in North America, 2 weeks ago in Bonn, Aachen, and Frankfurt, you hear people say, this is what we want. It is not our church, it is his church. So it is not the church we want, but the church that the Lord wants. And that church is a mystery. So it is his church, as Pope Paul VI underlined after Vatican II. We must set out again with courage and be open to discover the treasures of this church as a gift that we receive again and again in mystery. And I'd like to refer again to what our colleagues, and this came up in our conversation during the 2 days meeting of theologians before the seminar, the Kampala document that we have here. And I tried to take just a survey asking people, many theologians do not know about the Kampala document. And then what do you think of everyday Catholic people, parishioners? many do not know about this document. So we quote unquote, we recommended that all the members of our network read the document, we study the document. Then when we were told then to study the synthesis report, immediately what filled my mind is everything I'm reading there, oh, I've seen it before in the Kampala document. And then we went in and we were surprised. And I think Oseni Ogunu, a Nigerian missionary, has done the church in Africa a great work. He has documented all the teachings of the church in Africa from 1905 to 1994. The African Enchiridion. Now, last month, we started to talk about how can we make the African Enchiridion available. It's a volume of over 2,000. There's no money to publish it. It was published in Rome. So it's all the documents, and he did a lot of work. What is important here, as we will show subsequently, is so much has been done in this continent by our bishops, our pastoral leaders, and by our theologians. But the question is, do we know about them? Do we appreciate them? Or do we actually believe in ourselves, in what we are doing? This is a question for all of us to consider. And I will go quickly here because we want to go to our recommendations and proposals. But to understand that the Kampala document brings together all the teachings of the African magisterium, beginning from 1969 to the Second African Synod. And as I studied that document, and many of the statements of SECAM in plenary sessions, I see the same thing being spoken of in the synthesis report, and I said, not really as profound as what had been done in the Kampala document, and even the First and Second African Synodal document. I give you just 3 examples, and then go to the final part of my presentation, and then invite my colleagues to make their own intervention. Fixing our gaze on the Lord. The emergence of a new Africa, reborn and made fruitful by the gospel, is the preoccupation of the church family of God. The envisaged new Africa is one where the baptized are aware that their identity and vocation are intimately linked to the person of Jesus Christ, become like the leaven of the kingdom that the church takes and buries in the dough of African society. Renewed by the Holy Spirit in the love of the Father, they will be for Africa the salt of the earth and the life of the world. Now, the synthesis document says Jesus saw his own destiny represented in a seed, as a seed falling to the earth, something of no value or significance, destined for decay, yet possessing the dynamism of life, a dynamic that is unstoppable, unpredictable, Paschal. This is a dynamism destined to give life, to become bread for many, bread destined to be Eucharist. The issue here is the focus on Jesus. Father Anthony reminded us of that, and Pope John Paul II, in his document, Duc in Altum, said, we do not need any new plans. The plan has already been given, and that plan is Jesus Christ. When we enter into that mystery, then we can see clearly the road to our future. The second quote is, again, all the baptized are called to evangelize. And I will circulate this document because it's very important as you read in between the lines to see which of these two do you find more profound in its articulation of the mysteries. And I say that the Kampala document has it in a more profound way when it talks about what it means to be the people of God and our sharing in the dignity of all the baptized and what that sharing confers on us. So I would like to go the same way with co-responsibility. And I like to mention here that in 1974, SECAM's document, The Experience of the Church in the Work of Evangelization, stressed that the foundation of the success of the church's mission in Africa is hinged on co-responsibility and subsidiarity in local churches, as well as in the relationship between Africa and Rome. It's very important to remind ourselves that, because during this seminar, many have complained that the questions are not our own questions. And then I ask, so why can't we put our own questions into the document? And I'd like to remind every one of us that at the October 1974 Synod of Bishops, the Fourth Ordinary General Assembly on Evangelization in the Modern World, Africa also received the Instrumentum Laboris. But Tanzanian Bishop James Sangu of Mbeya Diocese, I think he died in 1998. He was the general relator. He presented a report on the continent of Africa called the Report on the Experience of the Work of Evangelization in Africa, that compiled all the answers to the questions of the lineamenta from both the African National and Regional Episcopal Conferences. But he came to section 5 in agreement with his brother bishops. The section 5 on communication of experiences of evangelization. It treated only 12 subjects. Bishop James Sangu decided to add additional subjects. And in his nota, his footnote, he said, I did this. The order, not only that he added, he also changed the structure. So where they say question 1, he began with maybe question 2. I said, we have reordered this in order to state better the priorities and concerns of evangelization in Africa. So if Bishop Sangu did this in 1974, what stops us from bringing our own questions in 2024 we are? That's how many years? 50 years later, we are still dealing with, okay, this is not our own question. Then, if it's not our own questions, I don't know whether we need papal dispensation if we change it. Good. So, I like to go to, some of the similarities we find here are many, but I like to go to the proposals that we have made for you, our brothers and sisters. So first is to look at some of the initiatives from Africa so far, because it's very important to see what has been going on since the Second Vatican Council up until now. Among many that has already been mentioned, the birth of regional episcopal conferences, the birth of SECAM, Association of Catholic Universities and Institutes of Africa and Madagascar, Pan-African Congress of the Apostolate of the Laity, Pan-African Episcopal Committee for Social Communications, Pan-African Catholic Theology and Pastoral Network, Associations of Religious Life and Lay Sodalities and Social Capitals, and then COSMAM, the Conference of Religious Major Superiors of Africa and Madagascar. With our network for the last 2 years, these two bodies have decided to develop on its own a training for religious in Africa and pastoral workers. And when this training was launched this past January, we thought that we are going to get 70. We got over 582 that the Zoom link could not work. So they had to be divided into French and English group. And the program is ongoing. My sister here, Sia, just gave a lecture yesterday, And this is to say there is a lot of collaboration going on among us theologians. And this is very effective. We have ongoing the School of Synodality run by Sister Beatrice Fine. We have a relationship, so it's a very big cooperation going on, breaking the boundaries. Sister Jose Ngalula, the work she's doing, working on issues of abuse and violations of human rights in Congo, and then she gets the support and the connection. So, like when we finished our meeting as committal and theologians from our network, we were singing, we were happy, because we felt the connection. And there are many more. Many of us here who are bishops can tell the stories of how they build partnerships and relationships between each other. Even Donum Fidei is going on among us. So a friend told me, who is not a Catholic, a very well-known Lutheran scholar, that said to me last year at an international meeting, Africa can only be saved by the Catholic Church. This was not said by a Catholic. He's a Lutheran, and said, because African Catholics alone have a unity that one good message, one good practice, one good voice that goes out from this hall, like he was saying, unlike us Protestants, we are fragmented and fractured. But you Catholics, you are one family. And so because of the number of Catholics in Africa and the unity that is among you, you are able to change Africa. But it requires, this is one of the oldest books written on African Catholicism, written by a foremost historian, Adrian Hastings. And he calls his book Essays in Discovery. And I think we should challenge each other, discover African Catholicism, treasure this unique heritage. And to be a good delegate, we recommend discovering more the riches of this continent, of which we are unworthy recipients of such a rich heritage. And I think that African theologians, within the last 6 years, we've been working together, and it's been very, very wonderful. But we rarely talk about this. One of the successful things we have done is the Dictionary of African Theology. Almost every person here who is a theologian contributed to either the dictionary or the handbook. And now we are in the process of translating the dictionary from Francais to English, and then the handbook from English to French, so that it can be available to everyone in the continent. And these are great treasures that we can look at the history of synodality in Africa, Catholic education, the history of SECAM. We find that in the dictionary. What I'm saying here, and right now, about 36 African theologians are working on the first African commentary on all the 16 documents of the Second Vatican Council. How Africa has received this document, because all the interpretations that we have come from outside Africa. And some of us were invited by European scholars to come and do the commentary for them. But they said, we do the commentary, you write only a reflection on our commentary. So we decided that we should paddle our own canoe. And the result is what will be presented to the African Church in the Jubilee year 2025. So some of the common themes we have already reported, but we want to give some final thoughts and some proposals for your kind consideration. The first, the questions are not African. I have already said that. We recommend, we propose, we appeal to you to consider the questions of God's people in Africa, that you have listened to their cries, to their voices since 2021, and let that form the questions that we should put in the report to the General Secretariat. I already gave the example of Bishop James Sangu. The third is, let us focus on assets of Africa rather than always bemoaning our needs. What are the assets of this continent? An asset-based approach to understanding Africa asks one simple question: what is working for us, and how can we get more of it? What makes us strong, and how can we strengthen it? Where is God speaking to a Moses among us? Where is the burning bush? And how can we identify it? Again, we propose that we must be careful not to fall into this binary of Africa versus the West. In my ministry or teaching ministry, most Africans who come with their PhD topic to me and start always Africa, African theology, African church, in relation to, in comparison with. We are unique. So it is not Africa versus the West, but rather let it be driven by the questions that emerge from everyday pastoral work. Because the cultural battle that I think has afflicted the West Africa should not become a ring for the battles that are going on in the West that often can distract us from focusing on the immediate needs of our own people. The other point is what I call the narratives of redemption. How is Jesus, the Savior, redeeming our history? Sometimes we focus on what I call the narratives of contamination. What is wrong with us? We Africans are this. You hear that, the prejudices we have against each other, our forms of the frameworks we use, the social hierarchies that we try to reinforce. Let us move away from narratives of contamination, negativities about ourselves, about our culture, about our history. No, these are the fruits of, sadly, the epistemological privileges that have been given to some Western frameworks. And then it's reinforced through even the kind of theology that we receive and the kind of questions that are being posed through those theologies. Let us look more at the narratives of redemption. What is God doing among us? What are the footprints of God in our history? The other point is fragmentation and fractured relationship that often leads to competition, rivalry, and division. For instance, we need to ask ourselves the question, where are our brothers and sisters, some of the delegates who are not here? Are they here because they are happy, or are they here because there's something that is worrying them? Because we need to be united. The other point that emerges from studying the documents of the church in Africa is the constant desire for self-sufficiency, to move away from dependency. In 1975, the whole of Africa, the African Council of Churches, made a moratorium against receiving foreign aid. Most of us, I would say, we theologians, if we are planning anything, if funding arrives. We have our youth group that we are working with, and this youth said, we want to do something for God in Africa if you give us the money. I said, that mentality, we have to work against this mentality that everything that we have to do is going to come from abroad, because now they are putting all kinds of conditionalities on the money that they give to us, and then creating a new partnership among us. So I would say, finally, I'd like to leave you with a framework that I hope you can remember. what we say, made in Africa. Made in Africa. Our desire to lead the church is going to be fruitful or not so fruitful if we are not made in Africa. So that requires, for instance, we make a proposal for the establishment of an African College of Cardinals as a response to the synthesis report inviting us to think of how the College of Cardinals could work better. We propose that the Pope should establish the Pontifical African Commission like the Pontifical Latin American Commission. And we propose that the College of Cardinals, working closely with SECAM, should play an important magisterial role in communion with the Pope. The publication of Fiducia Supplicans, just as Cardinal Fridolin said this morning, it created chaos, but it has also become a kairotic moment to wake us up so that Africa should not become a center for cultural experimentation or testing all forms of cultural experimentation in the West and some parts of Latin America, where the Catholic Church is becoming a guinea pig for sacralizing every social experiment out there. That requires eternal vigilance. And the division that we find in the world church today, Africa, through the African palaver, the sense of community, the sense of friendship, the love that is real, can become a depolarizing space where God can be encountered in new ways this day. We propose that a new relationship with Rome, particularly with the Propaganda Fide, should be presented during this synod. If we are the new center of Christianity, why are we not being treated as so? Africa is still under the protection of Propaganda Fide, whereas African bishops are relating or being the kind of reporting that we find is under Propaganda Fide. Bishops in North America, where I live, they work with the dicastery for bishops. Our own bishops work under Propaganda Fide. Then, sorry. So Archbishop Andrew made me to. I'm trying to control my laughter because they are not bishops. So we must think about this. So finally, the question of the role of the nuncio in African countries. How do they operate? How can we, our bishops, be respected? Our bishops be affirmed their agency and being subjects of ascription be upheld beyond simply giving instructions, receiving instruction and directives. We also mention here the need to listen to the poor. And in a more specific sense, we have pointed out some of the good examples in Africa. For instance, Catholic University of Mozambique is the largest today, 42,000 students. What they did in Mozambique, not many people know it. Even myself as an African, I learned about this from Italians who I work with under the Doctors for Africa, who have established this partnership with the College of Medicine of University of Mozambique. Why? In Mozambique, they decided to build in every province a campus of the Catholic University. And it's all over the place. Education, Catholic education is accessible. They are not competing diocese by diocese or congregation by congregation. We can look at Centenary Bank in Uganda, where the biggest bank, I think, I just asked when I went to Uganda the first time in 2007, Centenary, what is this Centenary? Says the Catholic Church. We can look at Songhai Farm in Benin. started by a Dominican priest, now recognized by the United Nations as the center of excellence, feeding so many people, modern agriculture. Yeah, we can look, there are many other things, but what I'm saying here, brothers and sisters, is made in Africa. Is our theology made in Africa? Is our pastoral plan made in Africa? Is our final report made in Africa? These are some of the challenges that I think we can confront. And finally, we talk about our young people. Our young people must become the focus. We have the statistics here last year that says 73% of the Catholic population is under 35 years. What is our plan for them? And what are the forgotten topics during this synod that we have not listened to? Who are the voices that we have not heard? But above all, let us recognize our own brokenness and wounds as a people. For over 300 years, Africa has suffered, and I think we have suffered enough. We are the people that God has placed the future of the continent in their hands. This is our own time. And finally, just as they are setting up the 10 Commission, we propose that this assembly would recommend that the commissions should have 2 African theologians in every commission, and that SECAM might consider setting up 10 commissions for Africa by Africans, confronting African problems, so that those 10 commissions can present our own African voices and African priorities to the study group. We must become, finally, proactive and not reactive to the changing context and the complexities of our historical circumstances. I'll pass on to my colleagues to add any other point. Please do introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I will only introduce myself and add nothing because my team leader said everything. I am very delighted to be part of the group of theologians in this sense. I will not be as active as I am now in working the synodal work if I were not part of this team. So I'm very happy to contribute my humble intellectual property in this regard. I am Sister Dominica Dipio from Uganda, a missionary sister of Mary Mother of the Church, a professor of literature and film in Makerere University. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sister Elizabeth Muleko, Sisters of St. Joseph, Mombasa, and part of this team. Thank you.
I'm Father Nicholas Segeja, working here in Kenya, Catholic University of Eastern Africa. I'm a Sia Gaba campus, but I come from Tanzania. My area of specialization is pastoral theology. And in the interest of time, let me just add voice on what Father Stan has just said, using words by Pope Benedict XVI when he wrote this exhortation, Avricimunos. Having observed, having looked at all these, what Father Stan has said, he recommended that for the church in Africa really to work as a mature church, it's high time that it develops a culture, a new culture of critical thinking and a creative thinking. And this one can be reflected in what we call strategic pastoral planning. It is Africhimunus number 16. Why strategic pastoral planning? It's not only a sign of maturity, but in this planning, if it is done well, the four moments that is reflected, they are reflected in this. It has a lot of time for consultation, for listening, and this is what we are talking about, the synodal process, the discernment. But the most important thing is the second moment, whereby we do our analysis in a very organized manner, so much that when we talk with facts. We talk when we have established the root causes of what people are, the root causes of the challenges that people are experiencing. But then, in the light of faith, in the light of the insights of the sources of liberation, coming to solutions. And he recommended, saying, look at the basic kind of pastoral activities, like evangelization, but evangelization in different expressions, in different facets, proclamation, witness, integral development, enculturation, deeper evangelization, name them, there are quite a number, but also catechesis. But again, sacraments in the life liturgy and the spirituality of the faith. These are like basic, and as long as we don't have very clear strategic plans on this, it will be like we are operating without common vision at any level. Because if we have no clear strategic planning, you have no common vision. You have no common mission. The goals are not clear. The objectives are not clear. Unless this culture comes, then we can be able to speak. Even when we receive any communication from anywhere, we can say, look, here in Africa, these are our goals, these are our objectives for these 5 years to come. And then we begin the palaver, the dialogue with anybody, not only the Vatican, it can be another continent. This is what Pope Benedict actually advised, and I believe very strongly from my information and background as a pastoral theologian, it's really very, very important. There are many things we may not even need to go share in Rome. We just need to plan and share the same with the church at different levels. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add, as Father was speaking, there's something that I forgot, and that is convergence communication approach that we recommend for the delegates. Convergence communication approach is, for instance, just to use an example. During COVID, some people are saying, okay, COVID is caused by, it came from China, the vaccines don't work, and then you don't get it at all if you take malaria drugs and all that. So there's no convergence. People got confused. We need to adopt the same thing, the convergence communication approach method. In the pastoral plan, in the diocese, everybody buys into it. When this August assembly makes a decision, then in Rome, there's a convergence. Every effort is moving in the same direction. Because when there is divergence, then it gets our people get confused, the international community gets confused, and then they can capitalize on that division and create more confusion. That's why we need a convergence communication approach leading up. Even from what comes out from this assembly, there has to be, in our own thinking, a convergence that shows that Africa is speaking with one voice as a united family of God.
Thank you. My name's Anthony Egan, South African Jesuit, currently teaching
have to balance myself.
combination of church history and some moral theology at Dipio University College, just down the road. I want to talk about a practical suggestion that might be brought to the Synod. It arises out of pastoral need that I observed myself. Where once, some years back, I was chatting to a 29-year-old parish priest who would drive over 1,000 kilometers on a Sunday to reach 3 of his 6 parts of his parish. We are suffering in Africa, but throughout the world, from a Eucharistic famine. People are simply not being able to access the very pinnacle of what it is to be the church, the body of Christ. In addition to that, the result of this, the consequence, is the risk of many Catholics being drawn away into other religious communities. We heard this session on the risk of some very dangerous Pentecostal sects. My proposal is rooted in a set of ideas that have been mooted since the 1960s at the very least, by theologians, including a number of African bishops, most recently by 2 bishops whom I have had the pleasure of knowing, Bishop Fritz Lobinger from South Africa, Bishop Francisco Claver from the Philippines. And it has been echoed most recently at the Amazon Synod. I refer, of course, to the proposal that we ordain suitably trained catechists for small areas, local areas. Now the objections I can think of are twofold. The rule on celibacy. But celibacy is not doctrine. Celibacy is discipline for diocesan priests. And secondly, the question of education. This simply invites us to consider what Cardinal Sobrana said, that we need theological formation for everyone. So let's do it, as we already are doing it, as we are already having excellent programs for training catechists. After all, as the Kampala document reminds us, if I may paraphrase, all the baptized are called to evangelize. And this is how, on this continent, and perhaps in collaboration with other parts of the Universal Church assembled in Rome, we may exercise co-responsibility and subsidiarity in order to greater serve the people of God.
Thank you very much, Father Tony. Your Eminencies, Your Excellencies, we have listened to their presentation. I know they must have provoked some ideas, and there may be areas that may need more clarification. So we have 3 to 7 minutes for discussion. We come down to 5 o'clock when we have our break. Now, yeah, we have the discussion. Break now? Break. Okay, we break? Okay, we take the break now. Then we come back.